From the very beginning, the narrator leans in with a tone that makes you feel like you've just stumbled into the middle of a secret conversation. He explains that everything people thought they understood about the Diddy situation may have been wrong, or at the very least, incomplete. He points directly to the TMZ article that sent the internet into a spiral, the one claiming that Diddy had secretly recorded his own legal team. Instead of treating the article as a simple headline, the narrator frames it as the missing piece of a much larger puzzle. He suggests that this wasn't random timing or a minor leak. This was the moment the ground beneath the case shifted. According to the narrator, the streets didn't just react, they erupted, because the implications of those recordings were far more dangerous than anyone initially understood. He sets the mood by hinting that the situation isn't just messy, it may be catastrophic. And as he builds the tension, he promises that the story you're about to hear doesn't just connect the dots, it reveals the timeline that everyone else overlooked. It's the kind of introduction that lets the viewer know they're about to see a version of events that feels sharper, clearer, and significantly more unsettling than anything they've heard before. The American accent shifts into the next section by inviting the viewer to consider a name that many people ignored at the time: Anthony Ricco. He lays out Ricco's reputation with the kind of detail that makes the viewer instantly understand the weight of what's coming. This wasn't a junior associate or a temporary consultant. Ricco was a federal defense veteran with decades of experience handling the toughest cases in the Southern District of New York. The narrator emphasizes that Ricco didn't leave after the Netflix documentary, after the public accusations, or after the leaks. He left before any of it. That timing becomes a major focal point because it suggests that Ricco's departure wasn't reactive, it was preemptive. The narrator highlights Ricco's official reason for withdrawing, the now famous statement about not being able to offer effective counsel under ABA standards, and he stresses just how serious that sentence truly is. At the time, the public brushed it off, partly because Diddy's camp quickly ridiculed Ricco, painting him as overly emotional or craving access. But as the narrator explains, those dismissive comments now look like a deliberate distraction. Ricco wasn't weak or dramatic. He was potentially the only person who recognized the storm forming behind the scenes. And the narrator makes it clear that this moment, which once felt insignificant, now reads like the first crack in the foundation. Here, the narrator steps back and invites the viewer to reassess Ricco's withdrawal through a new lens. His tone becomes deliberate and analytical, making the audience understand the weight behind those 21 words Ricco wrote in his withdrawal filing. The narrator explains that invoking ABA professional standards isn't something lawyers do casually, it's a warning flare. It signals that something happening behind closed doors was so severe, so ethically questionable, that Ricco believed staying on the case could jeopardize his own license. The narrator clarifies that this wasn't about personality conflicts or internal disagreements. It was about crossing lines that lawyers are trained their entire careers to avoid. He describes how, at the time, Ricco's exit seemed dramatic or confusing, but with everything that has come out since, that moment now feels like a revelation hiding in plain sight. The narrator breaks down how Ricco's words, largely ignored by the public, suddenly match perfectly with the later allegations of secret recordings, internal chaos, and strategic misconduct. He tells the viewer that sometimes the first person to run isn't the weakest, it's the one who already saw the fire. And Ricco didn't simply walk away, he issued a subtle warning that the legal team was heading into territory that could destroy them. In hindsight, the narrator points out, Ricco might have been the only one paying attention. When the narrator moves to the TMZ revelation, his voice sharpens with urgency. He describes how the article didn't just make headlines, it detonated them. The idea that Diddy secretly recorded one of his own attorneys, Mark Agnifilo, sent shockwaves through both legal circles and social media. The narrator explains that recording a lawyer without their knowledge isn't a small misstep. It's a direct attack on trust, on ethics, and on the sacred concept of attorney-client privilege. He emphasizes how the article mentioned Agnifilo being furious, and how that single word revealed more than any official statement could. This wasn't inconvenience or frustration, this was betrayal. The narrator then expands the question. If Diddy recorded Mark, who else was caught in those recordings? He reminds the viewer that legal teams often speak freely during strategy calls, assuming absolute confidentiality. But if those moments were secretly archived, the implications could be devastating. As he speaks, the viewer can practically feel the tension rising because the narrator makes it clear that the article wasn't simply telling the world something had gone wrong. It was hinting that something much bigger was buried beneath the surface, something that could shake the entire defense team at its core. The narrator transitions by acknowledging that once the idea of secret recordings enters the picture, every name connected to Diddy's legal team suddenly carries a new level of risk. He lists the prominent attorneys, Mark Agnifilo, Brian Steele, Nicole Westmoreland, Xavier Donaldson, Tenny Gargo, and reminds the viewer that these are not ordinary legal figures. They are high-level defense specialists whose reputations were built over decades of complex, high-stakes cases. The narrator brings attention to the fact that any recording capturing their conversations, strategies, frustrations, or reactions could be forensic gold for prosecutors. He explains how even a single careless comment about witnesses, jurors, or internal team disagreements could spiral into accusations of ethical violations. The viewer is made to understand that this isn't just about Diddy's guilt or innocence anymore. It's about whether his own lawyers might have been unknowingly pulled into a dangerous situation. The narrator paints a picture of uncertainty, an entire legal team walking on eggshells, unsure of what might surface. And just when the viewer thinks they grasp the severity, the narrator reminds them, Ricco might have been recorded too before he walked away. Suddenly, the whole team becomes part of a puzzle that nobody knew they were inside. The narrator now points the viewer toward one of the most confusing and suspicious parts of the entire situation, the number of hours recorded. He explains that Diddy's team insists there were only 3 days of filming done by a freelancer, roughly 72 hours, a believable number. But then he contrasts it with the swirling rumors and public claims that the total footage is actually around 140 hours. The narrator draws attention to the simple math. The numbers don't match. And when numbers don't match in a legal controversy, it usually means someone isn't telling the full truth. He breaks down the implications with a calm but intense tone. If 140 hours exist, that means this wasn't a short-term incident. It suggests prolonged recording sessions, multiple conversations, and a far deeper archive of private strategy than anyone previously admitted. The narrator explains that this gap in hours creates a whirlpool of questions. Were these recordings intentional? Were they ongoing? And was anyone on the legal team aware of what was happening? The viewer begins to understand that this isn't just a discrepancy, it's a clue that the recordings may extend into territory that could completely alter the outcome of the case. The narrator dives into this section with a tone that blends curiosity with dread. He lays out the possibilities in a way that makes the viewer imagine what might be hidden in those hours of audio and video. He explains that even the smallest conversation about witnesses, whether addresses, fears, or offhand comments, could be interpreted as improper influence. He then walks the viewer through the dangers of jury-related conversations, reminding them that even joking about sympathetic jurors or discussing how to sway them can be seen as misconduct. The narrator then shifts to the possibility of evidence-handling discussions, strategies that involve hiding documents, ignoring harmful proof, or misleading authorities. He explains that these aren't simply unethical, they're potentially felon-level violations. But he doesn't stop there. The narrator also highlights that internal team arguments, frustrations, or emotional reactions could be damaging too, not legally, but reputationally. Lawyers caught complaining or revealing private doubts could weaken the entire defense. He brings all these possibilities together to emphasize that the real fear isn't just what prosecutors might hear, it's what these recordings might reveal about the way the defense operated behind closed doors. The viewer is left with a feeling that anything, absolutely anything, could be hiding in that 140-hour archive. At this point, the narrator invites the viewer to revisit Ricco's departure with a fresh perspective. He suggests that Ricco may have been the first and only person to understand what the recordings meant. His withdrawal letter, which once sounded overly dramatic or vague, now reads like a silent alarm. The narrator carefully reconstructs the timeline. Ricco leaves, citing ABA ethical concerns. Months later, we learn about secret recordings. Later still, allegations of witness tampering and internal chaos surface. The narrator presents all of this as a pattern that only makes sense when you place Ricco's exit at the beginning of the chain. He paints Ricco not as the emotional or unstable figure Diddy's camp tried to portray, but as the most strategic one. And in a tone that feels both respectful and ominous, the narrator suggests that Ricco may have seen the edge of the cliff before anyone else noticed they were driving toward it. His exit wasn't weakness, it was survival. And now, as new information surfaces, the world is beginning to realize that he might have been the one person telling the truth from the start. Moving forward, the narrator focuses on the state of the remaining lawyers. His tone becomes almost sympathetic, acknowledging that they are now trapped in a situation filled with uncertainty. He explains that the lawyers don't know what Diddy recorded, when it was recorded, or whether the footage was shared. They don't know how much of it was obtained by prosecutors, what Netflix may have, or what 50 Cent claims to possess. The narrator highlights how this creates a kind of invisible pressure. Every lawyer now wonders whether their voice, their ideas, or their reactions are preserved somewhere in a file that could resurface at any moment. He explains that if even a sliver of the recordings captures misconduct or a conversation that crosses ethical boundaries, the lawyers could be forced into a new role, not defenders, but witnesses in a broader conspiracy. He emphasizes that this fear explains the sudden silence and tension seen around the team. The narrative shifts from a legal strategy problem to a personal survival dilemma. The viewer can feel the weight of the uncertainty pressing on each member of the team, as the narrator hints that the worst part of all may be that none of them know just how deep the recordings go. The narrator closes by reminding the viewer that the entire situation remains fluid and unresolved. He stresses that the numbers still don't add up, the timelines don't align, and the reactions from the legal team suggest far more panic than they want the public to see. He reflects on how Ricco was mocked when he left, yet now appears to have been the only one responding responsibly. The narrator poses an open-ended question to the audience, not to break immersion, but to emphasize that uncertainty is now the driving force of the story. He notes that the recordings, if they truly exist in the full 140-hour form, could be the most explosive element in Diddy's entire case. And with that, the narrator ends on a note of anticipation, reminding viewers that the story is evolving in real time, and the truth, whatever it is, may be far more complicated and far more damaging than anyone expected.